I wasn't actually going to do a video about this violin, but it just has a really amazing story. So a client came in with this violin. I took a look at it. It was falling apart. As we were standing there, the client kind of told me the story. So it was his great-grandmother's violin. Around the 1920s, his young great-grandmother used to play the violin quite a lot with her sisters, who played piano and I believe also violin. And so they played Irish tunes, they played for the local church group, and there was a young guy who was the cousin of one of the friends from the church with a Danish background, and he played the accordion, and I think he was very interested in this beautiful young violinist that lived in the house in Hurston.
Capital city of the state of Queensland. Population 600,000. Climate subtropical. Brisbane.
I think it may have inspired him to become a lot better at the accordion. And believe it or not long after, they got married. They moved to a smaller country town and they kept playing there. The violin eventually just ended up in her grandchild's cupboard for decades and decades and got forgotten. So the client that came in really, like he felt this connection to his great-grandmother through this violin, and it totally makes sense because a violin is such a personal thing. It's you play it every day or often and you pour your emotion into it. And you imagine getting that violin from a long-lost relative that was their most prized personal possession. So I've already done a fair bit of work on this violin, but when he came in there was something very curious. I looked at the violin and then there's this little patch here. And I looked at it and I said, that's an interesting patch. I haven't really seen that much before. And then I said, I know. She used to rest her thumb there when she was plucking. And my client just stood there. And I could see his eyes get moist because, this little patch on here told a story about his great-grandmother that no one else knew. So I'm going to restore this violin. Well, I've mostly restored this violin. Today I am going to put the finishing touches on, and while I do that, I'll share a little bit more about the story. Okay, so I've already done quite a bit of the work. So I've planed the fingerboard. I've even made the bridge. Here it is. I've done a lot of the repairs. There was just one little piece of wood I had to put in there. So I'm putting some glue into the crack and I rub it in using my finger. It rubs it in. You want it to come out the other side, so that's important. I glued, there were little cracks here. I've put a new saddle on. I've actually put on a new nut, which is up here. And now is kind of the time to do all the final touches. I think these are the original pegs here. And then there was an extra peg here that looks slightly different. So I have to make sure that they fit. I want to give the instrument a really good polish. Now about this area, this little patch, it was actually very bare when I got it, like it was just raw wood. I put a little bit of varnish on it for the simple reason that even though it tells the story of the great-grandmother, I wanted to make sure that the instrument is protected so it can last another 100 or 200 years. It can be passed down through the family. So I'm just going to finish these little areas like the saddle here and this tiny piece of wood that I had to fit. I'm going to use my magnifying glasses for this one. coffee. Getting on to the very final finish. I've been sanding this down with different grades of sandpaper. So the saddle is definitely finished. Just got to do a bit more work on this little patch, little corner here, and there's a bit of varnish damage underneath here. That's not from me. That was from when the saddle was off. They tried to put strings on without it, so it kind of damaged that area a bit. Putting a bit of water on this patch just to let the grain come up. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to start really polishing the whole instrument. I've already done some work, but this is where everything comes together and the instrument will start looking like it's for myself. I have this violin where it's basically just been left to fall apart. I need to just glue one little crack. Oh, actually there's two cracks, but a tiny bit on the other side as well. So I've got the clamp on and tightened here. And then I'll do the next bit of gluing. Okay, so the next bit is the other side of that same instrument. You can see the button has kind of broken off, so I'll be able to glue it back together. And now I'll just glue on the button. Once this back join is glued, I'll be putting in little reinforcements to make sure it doesn't come apart again. So on the back here, I'm going to have to do literally from end to end reinforcement cleats because it had fallen apart. So they would have bought the violin in the early 1900s. The violin is a German violin made in the Vogtland region of Germany. At that time was manufacturing over 90% of all violins made in the world. And it's starting to look really nice. Like I said, I already made the bridge. So we're getting very close to finishing everything. So her name was Bridget. She was one of, I believe, 3 sisters. You can see the picture of her and the family in this photo. There's a photo of her as a baby at a picnic. Not very sharp, but you can see something. Now around early 1900s, this instrument was bought. Around that time, there were a few music shops in Brisbane. Brisbane was quite small back then, but in this city, there were a few music shops. One was called Parlings. There was a couple of others. I don't recall their names right now. The guy that ran this shop wasn't that well trained. Unfortunately, his son did a lot of damage to a lot of very nice instruments because he didn't know how to repair the correct way, and he started using the wrong kind of glue. But you know, when you're living in a small town in a faraway country or continent like Australia, you have to just do what you can. When the violin breaks, you somehow have to get it fixed, and if there's nobody to fix it, you have to be creative, and unfortunately some people were a little bit too creative. This is actually starting to look really lovely. I'm really looking forward to putting the strings on. I'm going to make this instrument playable, so I'm going to use a couple of more modern parts on here that wouldn't have been on there back then. When people aren't that skilled at tuning, they can sometimes do a lot more damage than if you put in a tailpiece that has the finer tuners built in but isn't quite as authentic. So I'd rather go slightly inauthentic and have the instrument protected. Now the next thing I'm going to have to do is refit these pegs. Okay, got all the pegs fitted. It's actually a bit later in the day now. I'm just going to do a little bit of varnishing. Okay, so it's just a bit of varnishing on these areas here. These edges are quite worn, so putting a little bit of varnish on the edges as well. She would have worn them off just by playing. Okay, I've got to let that dry for a bit now. I'm just really looking forward to getting some strings on here and hearing it for the first time in I don't know how many years. Many years. Probably since the 1960s, that's my guess, since she passed away. Okay, here we go. Okay, a bit more polishing. So I'm using a French polishing technique. It's quite a thick varnish on here. It's quite hardy. That is looking a whole lot better. I pretty much just got to let this dry and then I can put the strings on. Alright, I'm just getting the tailpiece finished. Not too much to go. Okay, so the end pin is on and the tail gut is the right length. I've just got to shorten the ends. Ooh, this is exciting. Okay, I've got to put a bit of pencil in the string grooves. Okay, here we go. String time! Not long till we're going to hear the first sounds coming out of this beautiful violin. We're getting very close. I'll put on a chin rest as well. I think I might call it a night. I'll let the instrument settle in overnight. The client's coming in tomorrow to pick up tomorrow afternoon, which is very exciting. I've just put the chin rest on and I think I'm just going to tune it up. Okay, let's just check the sound post. I did put the sound post in before. I didn't show you. I don't know why it's the most interesting thing. I'll just have a super quick play so you can hear it now, and but then I'll give it a proper, like I'll just do all the finishing touches tomorrow. That actually sounds really nice. That's quite amazing. So here it is, an old German violin. Would have been made maybe around the turn of the century or very early 1900s. It has a Stradivarius label, which a lot of these instruments did. Would have been probably sold by one of the music shops in Brisbane at the time, or there was one violin shop. Yeah, so very interesting. I'm going to hang this up overnight and then tomorrow I'll give it a really good try. Okay, good morning. It is the next morning. Okay, let's have a little listen. Yeah, it sounds great. I'm just going to recheck the sound post, make sure it's in absolutely the right position. Actually, I might be able to improve it. working really nicely. So anyway, the violin is finished. What a journey it has been. The great grandson of the original owner brought the violin in. I discovered this little patch of missing varnish, and we worked out that it was caused by the player using her thumb when she was plucking. And it's a really unusual place to put your thumb. A lot of people put their thumb up a lot higher when they're plucking. They usually pluck up here, and it creates a slightly different sound, like a slapping on the fingerboard. And I'll show you some other old violins. Here, for example, we have an old French violin, and you can see the marks are up much higher all the way along. Same here. Look how deeply this one is worn. That's had a lot of playing. That's amazing. But then I have a really old instrument. You can see it's kind of spread all around here, and then all the way down, even down here. But it's so amazing because every little dent and blemish on the instrument tells a story. So unless you totally destroy your instrument, if it does get a little bump, you know, sometimes you can just put it down that you have just added to the story. Maybe you can even tell the little story of what you were doing when it happened. So I hope you liked this video. If you like the video, hit the like button. Also, make sure you subscribe to my channel, because that way you find out each time I post a new video. And there's a little bell to make sure you get notified. That's important as well. So in the meantime, have fun creating your own story and keep making beautiful music. I'll see you next time. Okay, just a super quick update. The guy came in and he was over the moon with the way the instrument looked and the way the instrument sounded. So that's a really nice end to the story, and he brought in his daughter, who will probably be playing that violin when she gets a little bit older.